In this video, we are going to discuss Bootstrap 5. Now, Bootstrap 5 was kind of hard for me to imagine how do we do this, because a lot of Bootstrap, what you're going to see in this video is, as opposed to some of the code that I've done before, is that when I would do code before, I would write things out in advance, be thoughtful, that kind of stuff, and then I would type it on out and explain it as I go along. But how I use Bootstrap and how I've seen other people use Bootstrap is a bit different, and it feels in the moment, I kind of want to say, and by that I mean that there's a lot of copy and paste. But before we even get to any of that, what we're going to do is look at Bootstrap. We're going to look at some of the different components that you could use to get up and get going. This is not a comprehensive overview of Bootstrap by any means, because this could be an easily very, very, very long series on that. And so this is really just a primer here. But the first thing we should notice or really think about is, what are we looking at here? Because a lot of things we've done, you could find in articles, Stack Overflow, blogs, other lessons, hopefully some of my videos, right? And those things are kind of the basics when we're talking about CSS or HTML or JavaScript. But here we have this whole website dedicated to this idea. We may have hinted at there's these library things out there when we were going over jQuery. But here, when you go to the website, you're greeted with all this stuff right here, right? And it's kind of important to get your bearings on how to go through documentation. And this isn't a tutorial purely on documentation, but it is important to kind of know how to think about, a resource when you go to it. So luckily right up here, we see, an introduction right here. It says, get started with Bootstrap, the world's most popular framework for building responsive mobile-first sites. And you may occasionally see something like JS Deliver. And as we move down here a little bit, you may look at technologies. You may say this word popper. You have no clue what that means probably, right? If you're new to web or you just haven't had to use this yet. So one thing to know is that sometimes when you're going over documentation and looking at this stuff, that there's going to be a lot of things that you can gloss over, because not everyone can know everything, right? And so what you want to know is, how do I start using this stuff, and how do I make my website development easier? And so let's look at this. We have the quick start here. It looks like we have the CSS, and we already know how to link CSS to our files. So looks like we could copy this here. Okay, that's pretty cool. And then we have JavaScript. So this thing is going to use JavaScript somehow going on in the background. So that's pretty cool. And it looks like you could bring your stuff in off of one script source here, or you could do them independently. All right, that's pretty neat. And before you go ahead and start clicking and stuff like that, and it may take a while and enough documentation to go through to know when you should just start working and when you're getting too into the weeds. But as we just scroll down here a little bit, we may want to read a little bit more before we just start slapping stuff into our project. And hey, look, we have a starter template right here. Well, this is pretty cool. So I'm going to go ahead and copy this. I'm going to come into here. I'm just going to paste over this. Awesome. That looks great. And let me click go live down here for our live server. And of course, it pops up on another window. But now we have our Bootstrap 5, or index file on our server running. It looks like we're bringing it in right here. They've commented, Bootstrap CSS in your own code. If you turn it into me or, hand it into your employer, odds are you're not going to need these HTML comments. It's just going to be known that this is Bootstrap because we're reading it right here, But also we have the option of the bundle that they're using. So if you wanted to, you could come in here and just delete this, which will be fine and dandy. We're only using the bundle for the remainder of the examples that we're going to do. So now that we have this, we know this is supposed to make stuff responsive. How does it do that? So in the next section, what we're going to go over is the grid system and how it kind of contains and easily takes that responsive layout style that we've just learned about and really automates and shorthands it for us. Okay, so let's go and look at some grids. But first, I think we need to make a pit stop first. Now, if you're going to be using documentation, it may help to kind of gauge where things are, right? And sometimes there are wordings for things that may not be entirely clear to you. But here we could go to layout and think, well, layout, grid, where I'm going to put content. Let's start checking here first, right? And we see we have breakpoints, columns. There's quite a bit of stuff here, but let's go ahead and get containers here. It says containers are a fundamental building block of Bootstrap that contain, pad, and align your content with a given device or viewport. Okay, cool. And how they work. This is always very important. Maybe you get lucky and slap the right thing into your code and everything's great, but it's nice to know. So containers are the most basic layout element in Bootstrap and are required when using our default grid system. Containers are used to contain, pad everything we said above. While containers can be nested, most layouts do not require a nested container. All right. And so it looks like we have some stuff we could do here. We could just use a container, which sets the max width at each responsive breakpoint. Fluid, which is 100% at all breakpoints. And then we have this container breakpoint, which is 100% until a specified breakpoint. Okay, so this is kind of neat. Let's scroll down here. We see these breakpoint grid, things, what happens here. So, this is 100% on screen smaller than 576 pixels. But then, on stuff that's greater than here, we don't have that 100% quite working out here. Although if we look at the fluid, like it said above, we're going to have 100% width all the way across here. So how do we use these? Well, let's look at these right here. So we have the container, small, medium, large, extra large, and XXL. So if we come up to here, it looks like this is the breakpoint one, 100% until a certain point. So let's just use the medium one here. I could copy them all, but let's come into our code. I'm going to save that. So that looks cool, but there's no color to it. So, it's kind of hard to see, right? I'm glad they give us the code, but there's no example down below. So let's go somewhere where we could get color, or a background color, I should say, because color's for font. So how do we do that? Well, if you don't know and there's a search bar, just start typing. So let's do background, color. I want to go to gradient because I like using ugly gradients, but let's just do background color. And we see we have some of these defaults here. So this is cool. So let me go ahead and let's just say copy out the background dark, and it shows you an example below how to do this here. So we see BG dark. I'm going to come in here and just rip that out. And now that looks, kind of wonky there, but we can see that's 100%. And once it gets past the, medium point there is some expanding going on as indicated in that table, but it only goes up to like a certain percentage after the medium size there. So that's cool. But what if we wanted to do something? Let's say we'll click back into here now. We have the responsive. So what if we did fluid? Well, all we have to do is come back in if we want something to be the entire width. We're going to remove the container medium there. Once again, that could be XL, XXL, small, whatever. And so what we should expect is it's 100% the entire time. We do see, in fact, that it is 100% the entire time. Now that we've looked at containers and we could see, we could make something 100% of the width, or, we could make it 100% up till a certain point, right? The next thing we want to do is, well, how do we have like rows and kind of start organizing stuff, right? So let's go to grid right here. And there's a lot of other things we could look at inside of layout, but this is for this video. Like I said, it's not a 90-part series. No one has time to watch that, at least, my class, right? So we're going to go to grid. And let's look at this. It says, use our powerful mobile first Flexbox grid and build out all sorts of stuff, right? And this is the important thing. A 12 column system. Keep that in mind here as we're assigning, how many columns something takes up. But we've already looked at responsive web previously, so this should be, a nod that we're just using that same thing all over again. So let's come into here. So we already have our container. And let's come on in here. What I'm going to do is, since we're not going to use any CSS or pictures right now, I'm just going to collapse this. So we have that right there, but let me come on back here. So BG dark. Okay, let me come in here and do BG dark. Because what I want to do is at least give some color to these. Because when I've done this example previously, it's just like a white on white example. So let me refresh this. And nothing, well, actually something is coming through here. So let me go ahead then and change the background color. We'll do let's do a text white for all of them. And once again, how I'm doing it here is typically how I would do it in the workplace as well. So you're not seeing any kind of different stuff. You're really seeing live how I would do it. So we have all that. And let's change the middle one. Let's do a background success. And these colors may not mean anything to you right now, how they're named, and that's all right. I'm just coming in here and showing you how to use these rows. So we have these three right here. We have these columns, which are referencing these right here. And so we have the COL, and we could see that we have a division here. And so this is going to be 12 columns that are being used. And if we come back to our column section, let's see here how it works, right? This is cool. You always want to look for this stuff. And so it says our grid supports 6 responsive breakpoints. We've already seen a table on what that looks like. So that means that the breakpoints are based on the min width media queries, something we've already looked at, meaning that they affect a breakpoint and all those above it, which is cool because you want to write for your mobile first. And so as you do stuff in Bootstrap, it already in many regards says, okay, we're going to start and assume you're doing something on a mobile screen, and then it will just kind of, almost cascade the styles upwards, right? And so let's see, is there anything else we need to know in here? They're incredibly flexible. There's a 12 template columns available per row, allowing you to create different combinations of elements that span any number of columns. Column classes indicate the number of template columns to span. And some of this is a bit gibberishy, or if you're new, you're like column, spread, element, combinations, you're like, give me a visual. And so this spans 4. But we could see that there's nothing here. It's just column. And this is because that when the row and the columns and all that stuff are working together there, it's saying, okay, just kind of even up the space between all of these things. But what if I wanted to come here and do column 8? We could see that this is noticeably larger, right? So this is going to take up 8 columns, but these 2 flanking it on the other side are getting what's left over. So if this is 8, that would be 9, 10, 11, 12. So that would mean that these are each 2 columns, with this being 8, because you have to do the math. So that's pretty neat. What else can we do with grids? Is there any other kind of interesting things? Because we could talk about gutters, all this other stuff in here, stuff with Sass, but that's a little above and beyond kind of what we care about now. When you're typically going through documentation and learning something new, you want to get the plane off the ground first before you start doing some kind of weird acrobatics, right? So we have our grid options right here. All right, so that's pretty cool. And it looks like we have this thing where Bootstrap's grid system can adapt across the breakpoints, all 6 of them. Okay, we know this. But then we start seeing these prefixes. And these prefixes you're going to see on nearly everything in Bootstrap. And that's because we have the SM, MD, large, extra, extra large. And that's pretty cool. You don't just have to do column or column hyphen ate what I've done right here, you could actually come in and say, no, this certain breakpoint right here, I want you to take up a certain amount of space. And so here's another example of them using the, the columns in here. But we could come in and we could, we've already done this to setting, one of the middle ones to a larger size. So this example has already been done. But this is the interesting one. What if we wanted to, at a certain point, say, what if I wanted to, at a breakpoint of large, what if I wanted to use, maybe say 8 on that one? What does that look like? Am I going to blow this thing up? Well, let's check it out. So I save. And we see here, that as it goes down here, right? It looks like it's the, the 8 and then 2 and 2. But as I expand past the medium, we see that there's a lot of overflow on this one, right? Because what happens is it's doing the math and it's saying, there's more than 12 columns being needed here. So what's going to happen is there's no room. So this flows over to the bottom. So this is still taking up 8 right here because of this column -8. And then this column right here is still set to kind of say, what's the leftover? What's, the most fair amount I should take up? So if we were to even take this off here, this may be an interesting example. We come down, these are all even. But as we hit the large size, we should see that it explodes right here. So it's got to do the calculations in the background. So my suggestion is, before you go and start doing any of the, layout stuff, like, shooting from the hip, just coding right away, make sure you have an idea of where you're going, how much space something should take up at a certain size. Because I showed you right here, I had the column, 8 right here, and then I have the column on the larger breakpoint. It's going to take up 8 columns here, and then we get this overflow, right? And so this is kind of where the planning comes in. You want to plan a little bit in advance of what your layout may be or look like at certain sizes. Because of copying and pasting and just assuming stuff, you could get into weird scenarios like this, and they could happen when you have hundreds of lines of code. So just keep that in mind. But this is the grid. This is just a very quick and dirty example of how you could get one up and going. There's a ton I'm skipping in all of these sections here, but what we're going to do next is we're going to look at some buttons, and then we're going to look at cards and a few other things, and kind of wrap this up. In this section here, we're going to be looking at buttons. Buttons, I think, in any styling library, any video I make on them, it's always like, why do I have to do it? Because they're so basic, right? You just look and then you copy or code the thing it tells you to. But just to go through the motions here, it says Bootstrap's custom button styles for actions and forms dialogues and more with, you can basically do a lot with buttons, right? And so we have a bunch of examples. And one thing that's important to note here is the shape of the button, but also the color and styles that are being applied, right? So what I would recommend is, if you're looking at these and your color palette for your own website is more earthy tone or something else, don't worry, I'll show you in another chapter in this video how to override those. But what I would recommend is, as you're getting your website set up and you're using Bootstrap or something like this, if something hasn't already been set up, just get the layout you want to, and then come back later and color in. So that way you're not, trying to do 2 things at one time. But if we were to use a button here, let's come in and let's just copy this, because I'm not going to copy them all, because we could just make the edits in place here. So if I wanted to come into here, and let me just remove these right here. So we have a button, and then the type is a button. That's cool. And then the class is BTN, short for button, right? And then we have button primary. So if we come up here, we see that we do indeed have a button. And you notice when we click it, it gets this kind of aura outline border thing going on right here. And let's see if I can actually make that a little bit bigger. So as I hover too, it gets just like a little bit darker as well. So there's a few things that are actually going on right here. It's not just the color and the shape, but there's when you interact with it, there's more things going on. And so if we wanted to, we could come in here and use this color for danger. So maybe this is somewhere in the process where someone is about ready to cancel a membership or something like that, because colors are important. You don't have to use red for every cancel, delete thing out there, although it is a very, very, very common color. But keep in mind of what your website or your company's website is trying to convey with colors, because you can't just slap stuff on there, because some people have, you know, these mental and visual, you know, clicks that happen when they see certain pairings of colors. This is not, you know, a video about color theory, but just letting you know out there. So we have primary. Once again, it gets a little bit dark. And then when we click on it, it does that little animation thing where we get that splash on the outside. And if I had some padding at the top here, we can most likely bring this in, or some margin. Besides, if I wanted to do that, just to sprinkle some extra stuff in there, how do I do it? Well, if I can't find it, I could come into margin and padding, which you can see is under utilities for layout. So rather than me clicking on this, let's go to utilities. Where's that at? Okay, we see utilities here. Awesome. And let's see, where was it at? So maybe it's position here. So we're looking in here and we're seeing not quite what we wanted to find, right? So let's come back over and let's go to, okay, maybe it was spacing. Maybe I just haven't had enough coffee yet today. And so this is starting to look right. And that right there was a true, honest interaction. It wasn't like me sending up a mistake. I honestly clicked on position and then I had to go to spacing. So we can see that we have the M for margin right here. We have a P for padding, but then we could add a T, B, S, E, X, Y if we just want to do the top, bottom, left, right, or if we want to set the entire X or Y axes, which is cool. And then there's these default sizes here of 0 all the way up to 5, and then we have auto. And so let's go to a good example. So we have MX, and then we have auto, which is centering it, which is typically how you center something on the X-axis, right? So that's pretty cool. So let's look at this. We have P2, so it's giving it some padding all the way around. So let's try doing this here. We have M, and let's do a margin. Margin top. I don't want to click anything else here. A margin top, and then let's do a 3. And we see that we, in fact, were able to come in and give ourselves a margin of 3, whatever this it calculates this value to be from the top here. So when we click it, we could see the animation splash border thing wraps all the way around, which is pretty cool. And there wasn't, I think, an explicit MT-30. So this is another thing about documentation you have to worry about, or at least keep in mind, right? Is that you kind of have to look and see the patterns of how they do things elsewhere. It's not like M-X-auto, it's MX or MY or MT or MB, you know, for the bottom, hyphen, and then, you know, what value do you want to give it there? So you kind of have to start looking at patterns too, if they don't explicitly tell you what you need. Sometimes there's experimentation. If not, there's always Stack Overflow. As we head back into the land of buttons, though, we have all these buttons right here. As you can tell, when it gets light, it gives you dark text. If it's a background, it gives you a light color. And that's because you want that nice contrast. You don't want blue on blue or some kind of green on top of another green. That's just not going to look fun or interesting. It's going to be really hard to read. So keep that in mind as well as you manipulate these and change your own colors, that you want a really good contrast ratio. So another thing that we could do is, rather than have the backgrounds filled in, we could just make these buttons just have, they're more minimalistic looking. So we could give them an outline. So if I wanted to come back in here and just experiment with the button I have the button, I have button danger, but if I wanted to come in and do button outline primary, let me take this off here. we now have this right here, which is pretty cool. I think that's pretty awesome, right? But we could also do stuff like we can make stuff large and small. And this does come into play when you're on certain kinds of phone sizes, which is nice to have. There are some libraries I've looked at where you can make really small buttons, and I just have never known the point in doing that at all. So now this thing, you may have not noticed it. I noticed it. It moved over a bit. It's already kind of this large size, you know, in here. Actually, everything does look fine there. But we have this, you know, button here, and it moved it out its width a little bit more. And as you can see here, that the real big difference is, you know, I think it's most like it looks like the padding on here is expanded, and then the font size gets increased. So if you want to toggle with your buttons, you could just come in here and just copy this, and then, you know, move it on in to, you know, whatever button you need. Another interesting thing that you will need 100% at some point is a way to disable a button. And you want to disable maybe when a user has uploaded something or is in the process of uploading and then retrieving something, because you don't want the process to continually fire off over and over and over and over again. Why? You may think, oh, I'm just sending it to their server, you know, who cares? But maybe that server is calling another server, and there's an additional cost being associated with it, right? But also maybe if data gets processed twice, there will be errors and stuff that trickle down to you on your side, and it becomes a frustrating experience, right? So there may be times in your, you know, careers or whatever where you have to just, you know, wholesale say, I don't want them to even click this button anymore until a process is over. You could do something like that by applying the disabled style to this class. And of course, we could do block buttons too. So this is pretty good. So as you can see here, all we do is just have a button that we've typically used here. And then we have this dgrid gap 2. Well, this is kind of interesting here. So what is a dgrid? And so we have a migrating to all this other stuff. We have the block buttons. And so what if I came in here and just did D? And then we could start seeing stuff like, oh, the D is for display, which is cool. And so now we're starting to be able to kind of read the shorthand. So this is a display grid with a gap 2. And so that's pretty cool. So this is now a display grid, and then there's this gap that is, you know, given we don't have to have our own spacing or margins here. We're just using the gap attribute. And so I could go on and on with some of this stuff, but this is buttons in a nutshell. Pretty straightforward stuff with some other caveats I've thrown in there. And so let's go ahead and look at cards in the next one. Now let's look at cards. And I could read the content up here, but I think it's better to look at a card and understand what is going on here. So if we go down, we have seen these everywhere. And the reason for that is because it's a common theme, right? A UI library wants to handle a lot of the common things you see on a web page, and then also allow you to edit, manipulate them as you need. So not everything looks super cookie cutter, right? But we can see we have an image here. We have, looks like a title, some of the text, and then a button that's hanging out right here. That's usually a call to action, right? And what's cool is that not all of these parts are super mandatory. But let's copy this. We're going to come in here, and we're just going to paste this on in. We're going to come on over. Oh, and we have this broken image here. Well, let's see. I have a picture of churro. But let's come in and get a picture of my dog here. So we'll go in assets. We're going to go to, okay. So now you see it's a little bit larger, right? And we'd have to control for the sizing, spacing, all that other jazz. And I actually think, yeah, that's why. Because in the last example, when I was looking at buttons, I'm like, why is this button so huge? Because I forgot I zoomed down in. But we have this picture here, which is cool because if you realize this is, as I keep zooming in, right, it's a sizable picture, but the constraints automatically, make it manageable, which is super nice. Now, typically, you do not want to have monster pictures that your browser or whatever has to resize. You typically want a image that's close to what you're already going to be using, because you don't want any processing power taken away from other, user experiences on the page. So imagine if you had like a zillion pictures, right, and they all had to be resized, the web page may move slow. But anyways, we can see here that we have this thing called class card, and this is cool. We have a class container up here. Why are these important? Because as you're going back through your code, these are like chapters in a book, right? And so if you're like, oh, I need to edit the card that has a picture of my dog Bernie here, you could just, do Control F and do card, and then you start to see this cluster of stuff occur right here, and not like a cluster in a bad way, right? And you could say, okay, here is my card, because what if I, did this and I had, another 3. So they're all stacked on top of each other here. Now, ideally, we'd probably want these to be horizontal and laid out, in left or right fashion here. But as you can see, even me just multiplying those by 3, right? And I don't even have like a header, a hero section, a footer, any other that cool stuff here. This is a lot of, compared to other things, requirements to pull this off, that, as you can see now, we're already down or up to 61 lines of code, and we have not done a lot of stuff here. So you kind of, beat the point back in. You could use these classes as ways to navigate your page when you're going back through and editing it or updating it. So let's keep looking at the cards here. So it looks like we have a card body. So if we came in here and just blew away this, would it still work and look fine? And yeah, it looks great. And what's cool about these is they're a lot like Legos, right? You have your instructions on how to make kind of the big masterpiece one, which you could still edit. You could center this button, change the colors, all this other stuff, right? But if you don't want a picture and you just want some text or something like that, you could still use the card class, and then say you just want a body with some text, and, in this case, I have a button too. You could go about doing that as well, which is super, super, super cool. And this is more of the same right here. And you could also have, it looks like a card subtitle. So let's go ahead and take this. And we got a little bit of this going on, right? Actually, was that the card? Okay, sorry. I copied the wrong thing. An H6, that's interesting. I haven't used an H6 in forever. So now we have this in here, which is cool because sometimes your subtitles will give you extra information, hopefully briefly, that maybe the title doesn't quite do it, and the user has not committed yet to reading, loads of text that may appear on your screen. So card subtitles are really nice as well to give a little bit of extra information on your, page or your section or your idea or your thought. And so once again, this doesn't really have a title or a subtitle, but it definitely has an image here at the top. And then it's got a body with some text on the inside. And it's even cool because you could do a card with just, list items in here, which is super nice. So we have list groups. We're not going to get into those. This isn't a comprehensive Bootstrap overview, but it's cool because card is really just a way of saying, hey, how do I want to organize this stuff? And if you want to put other card, childlike classes elements in here, you could do that. But you could also put other things that you may find, other components inside that may help you out as well. And you could get pretty creative with it. As I'm speaking too fast, you can see that this one right here has a lot of stuff going on. Some links, a title, an image, a bunch of items in here. Now you don't want to overload and make, these look kind of odd or whatever, but it's kind of cool that you could, essentially use this card. And as we could see, we're not even, look at all this, different stuff you could do with cards. You could even make them go sideways here. And so this is just a very, very brief look at cards. And in the next section, what we're going to do is we're going to look at the navbar. So see you in a moment. The next section we are looking at here are navbars. And navbars are cool. We've looked at them previously. And it's great that you have an ability now to just kind of copy and paste what you see in the docs and then manipulate it as you want to, in your vision. And so as we're looking in here, we could see how it works. And so we have different things here, like the navbar requires wrapping.navbar with navbar expand for responsive collapsing. Okay, maybe we don't look at that. Maybe we do know what it is. I'm not sure. And that's the thing. Sometimes you'll go down here and see these bullet points and realize that one or two may make sense, but after you use it for a while, you start to get what it's talking about. So we have the supported content. So it says navbars come with built-in support for a handful of subcomponents. Choose from the following as needed. And so we have the brand, we have the navbar nav, and all these other classes in here. So this is just talking about it. So what does it visually mean? And we see this, right? And this looks kind of nice. Maybe our website will look like this. But we also see that this is a lot, compared to some other things we've seen code that, may bulk up your page quite a bit, right? If I was to copy this and just put this in here, right? We're already at, 63 once it formats, 86 lines of code in here. So we come on in and bam, we have the navbar. No changes added. As you see, when it collapses to a smaller size, you have this automatic cool little drop down right here, which is nice. Let's expand this on out, and you can see that we don't have that drop down anymore. The search bar is not going to do anything. We don't have it hooked up to any logic. We have this drop down, but what I've been talking about this entire semester about, keeping your logic out of the front end, also writing stuff to be maintainable, easily readable. When you have your own, divs and sections, give them IDs or classes that easily allow you to see where you're at in a page, because you're going to have a lot of other content, right, in this page. And if we're already at 78, lines of code just for the navbar and 86 for the header, I'm really trying to drive it home here that being sloppy not just sucks for you when you do homework, but everyone else on your team, right? So let's go ahead and let's actually take this entire navbar out. Not that we're done with this section, but I've already scrolled through here. And let's start with something small here. So we have the brand. So we have the navbar right here, and then we have this thing called the brand. And so this looks cool. Let's copy and paste this in here. I didn't want to copy all of that, but it doesn't really matter. And so they're stacked on top of each other. And this is just text, and this appears to be a link right here because the cursor is changing. But I believe on my responsive web section, there was a part where we talked about navigation bars where you typically would have a text or an image. Now, if we scroll down, you could see that they have a way for you to put your image on your nav bar as well, which would be helpful if you do want to do that. And so then typically you can move your, home, order, about us, whatever sections to the right here. So it looks more like, typical other websites that you would go to. And so that's pretty cool. So this is a very thin, small way of getting started here. And you see we have the container fluid. We've already looked at that previously in this video, but it makes sense, right? You want it to be fluid as it gets bigger or it gets smaller, right? You don't want some weird breakpoint within your nav bar. It just doesn't make sense. And so as we come into here, we could see now that we have the option now to have these other links in here. This one's disabled. We've looked at disabled stuff. It wasn't just on a button, but you could slap it disabled on, I think just about anything, right? And you could limit the use of it. You wouldn't want to put a disabled on something that you wouldn't already, not be able to interact with. But if we were to come into here, copy this out, delete this to make sure we're not going to bring in any extra code. This is significantly smaller than I think the first example we looked at, but this is still pushing us towards almost 60 lines of code for this one item. We come into here and then we have the home, features, pricing, disabled. And if you notice, this is different from the buttons because when you click it, there's no splash, there's no visual of what just occurred, which is important to take note of. You could change this later. You could put buttons in here if you wanted to have that kind of effect. But I'm just trying to point this out that maybe you want the user to know that they just clicked home or just clicked features. But out of the box, at least for this example, it'll most likely respond once you hook it all the way up, but it won't have that clear visualization you may be looking for. And so forms, we saw the example above. You know, we have a display flex. We've already seen dgrid already discussed, I think in the button section here, right? And then we also have this form right here, which is kind of nice. And so you can see that not everything has to be hooked up against each other up here. I think this actually kind of looks a little tacky, right? You have your brand and then all this stuff here, and you essentially have like a boatload of dead space, right? But right here, it looks like you get around it by having the link right here. But then what's going on in this section here is that you're actually wrapping the form in a flex box right here, and you're able to shove it on over to, you know, this end here. So just because you're getting stuff out of the box here and you're copying and pasting it on in, you could still continue to wrap your items with other styling shorthands and get the desired effect or outcome that you want to. And so, yeah, there's a lot of examples, a lot of different colors. We looked at some colors already. This is using the background. That's what BG is for, dark. This is BG primary, that familiar blue color. And even if you wanted to do a little bit of customization yourself, you could do navbar light, but you could also come in and just add your own style in and of itself. Now you could do that from an external style sheet. You could do it inline if you wanted to right here. Depending if you're going to use that same color in other places, I may recommend an external style sheet. But this is a soft intro to looking at navbars, getting used to them, and just kind of scrolling through and seeing what you could use them for. I recommend, once again, starting off with a design. What is your desired look you want to go for? And then go in here and copy and paste the closest example, and then start adding feature by small feature to get it fleshed out to maybe how you want it to look. So in the next section, what we're going to look at is alerts. And then I think we're going to do a table, and then we're going to override styles and then wrap it up. So in this section, we're going to look at alerts. And alerts are pretty interesting because when a user clicks something or something happens, maybe a background process is going on. It all depends. You want to let the user know something is complete, done, something is ready to download, something along those lines there. So we have these alerts, and they really just look like, you know, a row, kind of what we've looked at, right? Except they're styled a little bit differently, got some padding, and they kind of just launch out at you here. So let's come in here and we'll just take an example of one. We'll just do the primary example. We'll put it into our code. We'll save it. And look, we have this right here. Everything checks out. It's just fine. Well, that's pretty cool. One thing I do want to point out, though, and I will show this, is that there is an inline dismissal. And it's important because you, unless you have some timer where you automatically in your JavaScript get rid of this, it'll just hang out. And let's see an example of this. Let's see if this is the one. Now, as you can see here, right, it keeps bringing them up. Imagine if we had that here and the rest of your website, you know, responds to this or whatever. And it's just like, yo, that kind of sucks, right? But here we're able to remove them. Well, how do we remove them? And before I go to that, it is nice too that they do provide a JavaScript example of how they would use and assemble, very similar to how we've added things to the DOM before, how you would just go ahead and add an alert inside of your web page, right? But say you want to dismiss it, how would that typically occur? What's a strategy or example you could use? We could come down into here where it says dismissing, right? Once again, good documentation. It gives you the header of what it's talking about, and then gives you some nice steps down below. So we could see right here that we have this div class. It truly is an alert, right? And then it's a warning being yellow. And it also has a class of alert, dismissible, fade, show, and it has the role of alert here. If you're not sure what all of these do, I just wouldn't touch them unless you know how you want to customize it, right? And we see that the text in here is that holy guacamole, you should check in, whatever it's asking you to do right here. And then we have a button, and it is a button here. But what's cool is that this is actually an X. It's not your typical buttons that we've seen before from the other component section right here. That the styling and all this stuff, we see the button close and all that other stuff is informing it that it should be an X. So let's go ahead and copy this. And let's actually come in below our other, let's space this out here. Our other alert, and we see it right here. And if we go ahead and click X, it disappears where this one stays, which is kind of cool. So most likely in, a final project or other things I have y'all do, or maybe if you're not even in my class and you're just looking at this stuff, because I'm doing, like I said, a very brief overview. This is how you could use an alert. Gives you the JavaScript to show you how to put them onto your page. Although I will say this as well. You may not necessarily want them to shove your content down. You may then want them to have some other kind of positioning value, so they maybe sit on top of your website, because you don't want your whole entire web page to rubber band as you have content coming in like this, right? But this is a very brief look at how you use alerts. In this example here, we're going to be looking at tables. Now, tables is not under components, it's under content, which I think is weird. I wish everything was kind of a component and you didn't have as many side clicky things to maneuver around. So if it's not in components, you may just want to click around till you find it or search docs up here. But if we remember back to our early HTML days in this video, we have our tables that looked really ugly. But if we were to copy this and bring this on in, we would see here that really HTML wise, a lot of the stuff looks the same. Yes, we have some specific Bootstrap stuff being called out in here. We have this class table, but if we go to our code, we see that it's taken up 100% of the width. So it's like very fluid, right? And I don't know why. Is this really their handle at fat? I don't know if that's, a dig at someone or some nickname I'm not aware of. Hopefully it's not something mean, but we can see that with very little effort that you are putting in compared to when you were making the original HTML, you're getting so much more bang for your buck for this. And on top of that, that's a lot of less styling that you have to include on your own, right? Just let someone else handle it for you. And so, you could remove these columns here if you don't want them enumerated as such, but you could do a lot of other truly interesting things in here. So we have these things called variants, which variants exist in many other kinds of libraries as well. It says use contextual classes to color tables and all that other jazz. So let's look at our options. And it looks like we could do it specifically on cells, rows, or an entire table, which is pretty cool. So if I wanted to come in here and do a, let's do a table secondary here. Remove that second quotation there. And now this thing is entirely gray, which may fit well with whatever color palette style that you use. But once again, imagine you have a zillion lines of rows. That will be a monster pain in the butt. So we could come back into here. We could do table stripe, table secondary. And now we have, this dark gray, light gray kind of thing, which helps out to a degree. We may not want to apply it at the table level, right? We may want to style our stuff a different way. But this is a nice way to be able to just take a table once I'll say it again, put everything in here, line it up, make sure things go where they need to go, and then come in later and fill in with the color and styling that you want. But now we don't have to find the nth, odd or even child of a table to apply color to it. We could just come in and say, hey, we want table hyphen striped and then table hyphen whatever color scheme we want to use. We could see also that we have a hover ability. So if we want to have a hover, once again, we could go back to the table here. And now we have, this kind of darkens it. And this gray isn't maybe the best example. But still, think about how much less code you have to write as you're going through and doing this with tables. And tables could get notoriously heavy in, the markup that you're doing here. And when you do all the CSS, right, that could be dozens of lines of code you have to write. So if you're ever going to use a table in Bootstrap, just know that's going to be a pretty easy and quick experience. And this is just a light overview of a lot of the stuff that you could do. So what we're going to do in the next section, and I believe it's the last section, is I'm going to show you how to override the styles. So when you get to that point of, okay, everything's laid out how I want it to be, I can now go in and change some of the colors and stuff. So in this final section, what we're going to look at is how do we take a style that we may like, and how do we go in and then change it, right? So what matters here is, and it's not always perfect, you'll find whenever you use a library, there are sometimes just bugs and other weird stuff that just happens in the background, and you kind of have to, figure out another way, right? But this video is not about creating, all these corner case examples I try and help you out of. This is kind of just a straightforward way of how do we take the style of a button here and override it with our own styles. So we have a button right here, and let me remove this right here. That's going to come into play later. But say we're just looking at this and we're like, I don't know what to do with this, right? Well, the first thing we could look at is we have two classes here. We have it highlighted. We have a button and we have a button primary. And this makes a lot of sense because we have button and we have button primary. So all this looks okay. It's just about sizing, text decoration, all this other stuff. There's a transition kind of thing going on here. But what if we just went over here? Because these are non-consequential things here. We could, okay, border doesn't do much. Let's take the background color. Okay. All right. So this seems to be the class we are targeting. So what if I wanted to change this to something else? Let me come here and just copy this. And let me open my CSS file I have. And keep in mind that this is coming in after the Bootstrap one here. So I'm moving this on in. And what if I wanted to do, let's just see here. We'll do a bunch of Fs or something like that. Maybe not. There we go. And let's come in and let's do something like this. Yeah, let's take this. That looks good. So that's the color of the font. Let's take the background color. So that's dark. This should probably be bright. So let's go to, I don't know. This is probably gonna look extremely terrible. That is not what I wanted at all. This is the thing about some of these controls. They're helpful and the IntelliSense is great, but sometimes you're like, stop it. So let's just come to black for this. There we go. Enough fiddling around, right? But we have this change now. We can see these are crossed out, which means they're invalid. But now we have button primary above, right? And that makes sense because of just kind of the order of how we're bringing these things in. So we have this, But now when we click, we have this, you see that blue border right there that's forming around it. But then also as I hover over it, it turns blue. And you may be like, man, this is a pain in the ass. Like, how do I even do this? Well, you could click this hover thing and you have all these force element states. So now that this is selected, what happens when we, go active? It turns blue. Well, that's kind of cool. So we have button primary active. So let's come in here and write out our pseudo selector, which is the exact same thing, but we could just type the word active in there. And let me change this a little bit. We'll do that. And so now, that's kind of weird. As I come over, okay, so there's a little bit of an issue, but when I click active, hey, it kind of changes that color. So there's this weird state where when I'm hovering over it, it does this. So what if I wanted to do something like this? Let's see if this works. And this may work, it may not work. I mean, this is kind of debugging in process. So we have active, and let's have hover be the same thing. So it's over, you click it, but then when you like move it there, it still goes back to blue and you have this kind of weird state, right? So one thing you could do is, since it's still highlighted right here, let's find where it changes blue. So let's click target. Okay. Focus within. Nope. Focus. We could see that it's this weird blue color right here. Is it like that anywhere else? Active. Nope. Hover. Nope. Visited. Nope. So let's take this focus right here. And it looks kind of interesting because it seems like, you would have focus covered, but we don't. We have active, we have hover. So let's come into here now. We'll take this, and you may want to do different stuff. This is not going to look super special or anything like that, right? This is a quick and dirty way of pulling this off. But let's come in here, hover. Ooh, but we're still getting this blue. Well, that kind of sucks. So why is that? So let's go back to focus here. And let's see this. So everything but this box shadow is getting implemented here. So this is kind of weird, right? So how about we take this box shadow, because everything else is crossed off because we're overwriting it, but not this box shadow, so it's still coming through. So let's come in here, and it's this RGB color. Let's not have that. Let's go keep everything hex, just so everything's streamlined. And let's do something just kind of, I'm already good at like really gaudy stuff. Let's, I don't know. Let's give it like that color, right? We can see it's already working, but let's just refresh this. So we hover over, it gets that background, and we click it. It's still turning to blue. So why is that? What do we do here? So it seems like we kind of get it, but not quite. So let's click on this focus again and see what could be going on right here. So as we're looking at this, right, let's start clicking other things in here too. And we're starting to see that we have this other thing in here, right? This button primary active focus. And so what I'm going to do here is kind of a quick wholesale copy of this. Once again, you want to be careful and as precision point as possible when you're coming on through and overriding styles. But let's say I wanted to take this and then come into here. Now it stays the same up here, right? And there could be some cleaning up I need to do coming in here. This is me just wholesale coming in and taking, all the classes, all the configurations that are going to be using this box shadow in here. But this is a nice way to troubleshoot because we did go to focus, we did go to active, but maybe we need to select multiple of these at one time and see at what points in the state of it being interacted with is something, leaking on in through style wise that we don't want. So yeah, that's the Bootstrap 5, quick and dirty in a nutshell. It's mainly about the documentation. And then once you get it out there, how do you intelligently override some of the styles you want, and how to kind of start piecing the stuff together. So I hope you like the video, and I'll see y'all in the next one.